Right, anyway, we're on air. Final topic in epistemology, limits of knowledge. Or in the words, scepticism. This is perhaps what epistemology is all about. So in terms of scepticism, you've got two different kinds of doubt. You've got local doubt or ordinary scepticism, and you've got global doubt or radical scepticism. This is what we call philosophical scepticism. So when we're talking about scepticism in epistemology, or the limits of knowledge in epistemology, we're talking more about this kind of radical doubt, doubting, or global doubt, doubting the whole of reality. That's what this is. So an ordinary form of scepticism, which is what you'll all have in your ordinary lives, are to doubt ordinary things like whether it's going to rain today, or whether this person likes you or not, or any other of these common matters that you might be doubting as to whether it's actually the case. Whether the world is flat, whether the world is round. That's another ordinary doubt. A radical doubt is when you doubt something that would bring your whole belief system into question. So this is the scepticism of the whole of our reality. And that's what we're going to be looking at when we're looking at epistemology. So it comes down to what we call the infinite regress of justification, and the infinite regress fallacy is sometimes used to argue against a particular view. What this is the idea that there is no base that holds up any of our knowledge. There is no fundamental principle or proposition that we know to be true which serves as the foundation for the rest of our knowledge base. So it's kind of like asking, well, why is that the case? And then, well, why is that the case? And why is that the case? And why is that the case? It's that thing that you do when you're a child, when you keep asking why. And it eventually gets to a point when you're asking, say, your parents why, or anyone why, that they're going to get to a point where they can't really answer that question anymore. It gets to a place where there isn't really an answer. And that's one of the main bases for the issue of philosophical scepticism. The idea that maybe everything that we take to be true isn't actually true in the way we think it is. Maybe the whole of reality isn't actually like what we believe it to be, because there is no base justification for anything that we know. Of course, some people might say, well, it's like God or the Big Bang or something like that, but then it just lends itself to the question, well, why God or why Big Bang? Then what answer do we have? So that's how it all works. In this topic, we're going to be focusing on Descartes' scepticism, Descartes' radical doubt, and how he goes from this radical method of doubt to his foundational beliefs, what hopefully would hold up his knowledge base. And that's his key thesis, as we've already touched on so far. So this is Descartes' three waves of doubt. This was Descartes' reason for doubting our whole belief system, philosophical scepticism. The first wave of doubt was doubting that his senses are actually true, or his perceptions of things are actually true in the way that he sees them. So he has reason, he supposes, to doubt his senses. One of them is that our senses can come under illusions or hallucinations. They're not always true. It seems like when we look at some things, for example, putting a pencil in the water, the pencil looks bent. Our senses are doubting us in that occasion. They're deceiving us. Because the pencil isn't actually bent, we know that. It's not bent because when you pull it out, it's straight. But when you put it in the water, it's bent. That's a case of our senses doubting us. There are plenty of cases in which we have to understand that what we're sensing at that particular time isn't actually true. Now this is one first reason for Descartes to doubt the validity of our senses. First wave of doubt. Second wave of doubt is whether we're dreaming or whether we're awake. How often is it when you're in a dream that you are genuinely mistaken for that thing being real? When you're having a conversation with someone in your dream, or when you're running away from someone, or when you're flying around or whatever, depending on what that dream is. You can be genuinely mistaken for that being reality at that point in time, only to be woken up and realise that actually no, that wasn't reality. But again, that gives us reason to doubt this waking world. what if this is the dream that we're currently in thinking is reality, but it's actually a dream, until we at some other point realise that it's not actually real, it was just a dream. So there's his second wave of doubt. His third wave of doubt, which is perhaps his most crucial and radical wave of doubt, the doubt that really brings into question everything, is that he cannot know whether this is not just the workings of some evil demon, that actually everything that he sees or senses as reality, this whole thing we've got now, isn't just some kind of simulated reality, some kind of big ruse from some demon who makes him think that this is all real, but isn't actually real at all. It's just a great deception. And there's no way of Descartes knowing that this isn't real. It's the whole problem of the mind's problem. There's no way of me going into your mind to see if that there's anyone actually there. It might just be the ruse of my perception. It might just be some kind of trickery going on, until at some point I realised that actually no, that wasn't real. It was all just a simulation. Sort of like the Matrix. That's where the idea of the Matrix comes from. So this was his most radical wave, and the wave of doubt that does bring into question all of reality. So how Descartes saw this process was his beliefs were like the analogy of an apple basket. All of his beliefs were apples in the basket. That's beliefs in your mind. And for Descartes, the only way to know that he hasn't got any rotten beliefs, i.e. rotten apples, in his basket, was to throw them all out and to inspect them one by one and only put the ones back in that he is sure are not rotten. And that's what he wanted to do with his beliefs. He wanted to throw all of his beliefs out of the basket by seeing this whole wave of doubt that he has, this radical skepticism that he doubts all of his beliefs, throws them all out of the basket and inspects them one by one to see which ones can be put in first. So for Descartes, the first belief, the first apple he could put back in his basket was the one he was most certain of, and that was cogito ergo sum. So let's say it is true. Let's say it could be possible that none of you are actually real, that this is all just some great deception from some evil demon, some simulation. He could doubt then that any of you are real, that any of this is real in the way we think it is. But one thing he couldn't doubt was that he was the one being deceived, that there was a thinking thing, that there was a subject of all of that deception. It's just a self-evident truth that if you are a thinking thing or a doubting thing, then you are a thing. So that was his first major truth, his first certainty, the first foundational belief that he has to accept, that he cannot doubt, is that he is at least a thinking thing, conscious of all of this, what's going on, whether it is real or not in the way that he thinks it is. So from this, Descartes goes into some other proofs. This is his deduction now. So he's got this intuition that he is at least a thinking thing, that he has to be a thinking thing. And from here, Descartes goes into proving some other things like God and the external world. One of the proofs that he has for the external world was, he asked the question, well, is the external world either subject to my will or not subject to my will? Well, it's not subject to my will because I can't help everything that's going on in my perception. Therefore, it's something outside of my willpower. If it's something outside of my willpower, the willpower is the most essential part of my nature, my willpower, then it's not the construction of me. This isn't mine. It's external to me. So because there is something external to me, he asks the question, well, what is this thing external to me? And he has two options. Either this stuff that is external to me that I sense is mind-independent matter, physical stuff, or it's just some deception from God. His proof that this cannot be God, this cannot just be some kind of idealist deception, that there is matter but it's actually not there, is because God is not a deceiver. God is benevolent, according to Descartes. He has this clear and distinct intuition that God is this perfect, good being that wouldn't be a deceiver. Therefore, by process of elimination, the external world is a physical world. That was his proof of the external physical world. So it's not God, it's got to be matter. He also has a variety of arguments for God, which gives him reason to believe that God is this being in which he thinks he is, this all-powerful or omnibenevolent, all-knowing being. One of those proofs, which we'll talk about, which isn't discussed in the metaphysics of God, is his trademark argument. So for Descartes, he thinks that there must be a God. And the reason why there must be a God is because he has this perfect idea of God. And this perfect idea of God is not something he's learnt from the outside. It's not some empirical observation. It's something innate, going back to innatism, if you remember that rationalism. This perfect idea of God is this innate, a priori truth that he has, this necessary truth about this perfect being, which he has plenty of arguments for. And for Descartes, the only provenance, the only source of that idea of God must have been God himself. The idea that God is this idea of God is God's trademark, just as the creator of some watch or some belt would have their trademark on that. So that was one of his arguments for God. So these all come from this starting premise of I think therefore I am, this foundational belief of I think therefore I am, which he got to through this radical system of doubt, doubting all of reality. So there are some issues with Descartes' method of doubt. There are some people that have a problem with it. The first one is to doubt whether Descartes is actually sincere in this method of doubt. So this is a big issue. Descartes made this grand thesis. Okay, he's a very, very clever guy, very clever philosopher, and he took you on this journey. And the start of that journey was to ask you, or to invite you, to doubt all of your reality, to doubt whether anything's actually real. And he does this in a very sophisticated way. Some people believe, or might argue, that Descartes' method in this way to get you to doubt all of your beliefs was actually just a great ruse in order to prove his arguments for God and the external world. He was just taking you on this philosophical journey, leading you down this path in order to prove his theories. It's sort of like asking you just to forget everything. Get rid of all your beliefs, all right? So you don't believe anything anymore. When you're in this place of the unknown, this place of radical doubt, he will lead you to the light. He will be the one that will show you what is and isn't true. So that's one objection to Descartes' method of doubt, which you may or may not think is fair. The second objection is, why do you have to throw out all the apples? Why do you have to get rid of every belief you have? Why do you have to doubt your whole belief system? Why do you have to bring it all into question? Why not doubt all of your beliefs one by one? Why not just take each belief in turn and see if that's true, examine it properly, examine each apple in turn and put it back in? Of course, there might be a reply to this, which is that this would just simply be an impossible task. Maybe the only way to do it in a pragmatic way is to knock it all down and rebuild it back up from its foundations. Maybe it would be too difficult to go through the rubble, as it were, to find out which beliefs are the right ones. We have too many beliefs, of course, that it just wouldn't be a practical thing to do, some might say. And then the last one is the paradox of doubting all of your beliefs. So this comes back to Epicurus, all right? This is the paradox that, let's say, it's back to Socrates, the only thing I know is that I know nothing. Whereas it seems like a paradox there, because you can't literally know nothing, because you at least have to know that you know nothing, which means that you know at least one thing. It's the same with the paradox of doubting all of your beliefs. To doubt all of your beliefs is to at least leave behind one belief, and that is that you had beliefs to doubt in the first place. So you necessarily have to leave behind one belief. Of course, a reply to this might be that, well, at least that can be one apple that could never be shifted from the basket, that you have beliefs in the first place to doubt. So that is one belief that has to be an indubitable belief. A belief you cannot doubt is that you have beliefs to doubt in the first place. Just like saying, the only thing I know is I know nothing, means that, well, you have to at least know one thing, that you know nothing. So it's a paradox. So we've got a few different views on this from the empiricists, and these are the empiricist views on philosophical skepticism. So this is going to be taking more of a pragmatic step to this radical method of doubt. The first of which is Locke. Locke suggests that the substantia, which he calls it substantia, is something which is beyond the limits of what we can actually understand. A substantia for Locke is what makes reality exist, what substantiates reality, what gives rise to the existence of anything. To ask after the question, what gives rise to the existence of anything for Locke, is a side of the coin that we can never unturn. It's a piece of our knowledge that we will never be able to get at. We'll never be able to touch the fingertip with our fingertip. It's just not something you can do. Okay? And that's the same as what Locke thinks is getting at this substantia of reality. It's just not something we can ever venture to. So therefore it's not worth us trying to venture there. Hume, he thought skepticism was a good thing. It's good to be skeptical, but you have to have your limits of that skepticism and you have to take a pragmatic approach to it. For Hume, radical skepticism is just a bit too much. So he thought we had to have this mitigated skepticism, a skepticism that only goes so far. And that means for Hume that we have to take somewhat of a pragmatic approach to skepticism, and those elements of knowledge that go a little bit too far are just useless. Similar to Locke. Good amount of skepticism is good, but when that gets too far, it stops being practical, stops being pragmatic. That's where it becomes useless. Berkeley's idealism would be a response to this. Berkeley was an empiricist, even though he was an idealist. Some people get that confused, but he was the two. He thought that the only things that we can know are the things that we are aware of, for one. And we're not aware of this, what underlies reality, what underlies existence, whether there is physical matter out there. And that's why he thought we ought to accept idealism. Idealism, the view is that the only things that we're aware of are mind things. And within that, he also thought we were aware of God in that way, which you might have an issue with. But Berkeley wouldn't have an issue with this kind of skepticism that Descartes has, because he doesn't believe in this mind-independent external world, which you would have to believe in to have this radical skepticism, some would say. So that's why he put forward his idealism as a response to this radical skepticism. Russell thought we've talked about Russell before in terms of inference to the best explanation. Problem of other minds, inference to best explanation. Out of the two options, you either have a mind or you don't. The inference to best explanation is we may as well go with that you do have a mind, because there's no more reason to go with one way than another. So you may as well just go with the common sense way, the way that we all generally think is true. Same with reality. Inference to the best explanation is there either is this mind-independent reality or there isn't. Either it's a great ruse, great philosophical trickery, or it's just something there as we see it. For Russell, there's no reason to go any which way. So you may as well just go with the common sense way, the inference, the best explanation, which is that there is this mind-independent world out there. That best explains all of our knowledge, that there is this thing out there, and that there isn't this evil demon that's tricking us into thinking that you're all real, but you're actually not. It's just not pragmatic. There's no good reason to actually believe it, according to Russell. Reliabilism, turning back now to JTB. Remember reliabilism as a solution to the Gettier problem. Again, we should just trust our reliable beliefs. And it seems like when we go about our lives, we have all these beliefs about the world. Okay, we don't need to be radically skeptical about those beliefs because they seem to be working for us. Again, it's pragmatic. We have these beliefs that are pragmatically true. The fact that I walk through the door and walk out and talk to you and do all these things seems true because I'm still living and I'm still working with my belief system in a successful way. So that's reliabilism. And then finally, Wittgenstein's language games. Now this is perhaps for me, a bit of a weaker way of looking at this, but again, it's looking at the pragmatic approaches to language. Now, what Wittgenstein thought was most of our philosophical muddles, particularly things like radical skepticism, comes down to how we use language. And he thinks that when you let language go on holiday, as it were, in which we're doing with this radical skepticism about reality, that's when we get into these philosophical muddles. So he thought we have to look at the way we're using language here. And just as Wittgenstein thought that when we're talking about this mind, this private thing in our heads, this qualia stuff, that doesn't have any public use, it's a misuse of language. The only things that have meaning in our public domain are the things that we can talk about within this community of language speakers, which is us. The meaning is use, is what Wittgenstein says. Therefore, talking about the substantia of reality and whether you're actually real is a misuse of language, according to Wittgenstein. It's not really getting at anything, because it wouldn't mean anything if you weren't there to be involved in this language game of ours, this game of us developing meaning and using language in this way that we do between each other. There isn't such a thing as a private language. So there has to be something out there. You have to be out there to be involved in this activity of using language and creating meaning and discussing things. Although I'm not sure about that, because it doesn't really refute the idea that this language game that we're playing could just be me playing with myself, just as it is in a dream. When I'm having a conversation with someone in a dream, that's a conversation with someone which is actually just me. It's just a fragment of my mind that I'm speaking to in a sort of weird schizophrenic-like way. It's kind of an odd thing, isn't it? What's stopping it from being true of this now? Like, you're all just a fragment of my mind that I'm having a conversation with. We're all just having a dance in the great mind of me. But that's at least a reply to this radical skepticism. Now you can think about whether you think Wittgenstein has got something here, and of course, more importantly, whether you think Descartes on something here, whether Descartes' radical skeptical doubts are valid or not, and where the limits of our knowledge lies. So that's that.